Virgil Walter Earp was the first of the Earp brothers to feel the wrath of the cowboy element after the famous gunfight at the OK Corral. On December 28, 1881, at around 11:30 p.m., Virgil was walking back to the Cosmopolitan Hotel, where most of the Earp family kept rooms, when he was ambushed. 3 double-barreled shotguns, loaded with buckshot, were fired at Virgil from a distance of about 60 feet. Virgil was hit with buckshot in his left arm and on his left side. The remaining buckshot that didn't hit Virgil peppered the Crystal Palace Saloon, with 3 going through the windows and 1 barely missing a bystander getting ready for bed. Virgil was able to stagger into the Oriental Saloon to find his brother Wyatt, and doctors were summoned. Virgil's left arm had taken most of the damage. Thankfully, the rest of the buckshot had missed vital organs. The doctors removed splintered bone from Virgil's arm, leaving it permanently crippled. This ambush would not satisfy the cowboy seeking revenge, however, and Morgan Earp would be assassinated on March the 18th, 1882. Afterwards, the Earps would seek out their own revenge, with what was later termed the Earp Vendetta ride. Virgil and his wife Allie headed back to California, to where Virgil's parents lived. It was on a trip to San Francisco that Virgil was met by a reporter and interviewed. The following is a reading of that interview. From the San Francisco Examiner, San Francisco, California, May 27th, 1882. Virgil W. Earp. He comes to San Francisco for surgical treatment. Shot and crippled for life. Admission that the Earp party killed Stillwell. Statement that they will surrender. At Port Costa, Thursday noon, on the Southern Pacific Express train, an Examiner representative met Virgil of Tombstone, Arizona. The Earp boys have figured conspicuously in print for several months past in connection with numerous murderous affrays with the cowboys about Tombstone and Tucson, involving loss of life on both sides, including the assassination of Morgan Earp by Frank Stillwell while the former was playing billiards in a Tombstone saloon, and the subsequent killing of Stillwell by the Earp party. For the killing of Stillwell, the Earps were pursued by the sheriff of Cochise County and are still in refuge. Reports have widely differed in placing the responsibility for the crimes committed, as well as establishing the cause of the trouble. The friends of each side warmly reciprocating and picturing the other side in the worst lights of ruffianism. Virgil Earp is not a ruffian in appearance. He was found in a sleeping car, smoking a cigar. His face, voice, and manner were prepossessing. He is close to 6 feet in height, of medium build, chestnut hair, sandy mustache, light eyebrows, quiet blue eyes, and frank expression. He wore a wide-brimmed, slate-colored slouch hat, pants of a brown and white stripe, and a blue diagonal coat and vest, both the latter with bullet holes in them, bearing testimony of a recent fight when he was shot in the back, the bullet coming out at the front of his vest. His left arm was carried in a sling, also a memento of his last fight, when he received a bullet in his arm, since causing the loss of about 6 inches of bone, and which cripples him for life. The wounded arm is the cause of his visit to the city, where he seeks surgical aid in hope of so far recovering its use that he may be able to dress himself unassisted. The injured member kept him in severe pain, increased by the jarring of the cars, in which he had come from Colton, where he had been on a visit to his parents, and to bury his brother Morgan. Questioned concerning his experience in Arizona, together with other details of his life, he answered pleasantly and told his story as follows. Story of his life.
I was born in Kentucky, but was raised in Illinois and Iowa. My parents came to this state, settling in San Bernardino near Colton, at which later place they now live. I served for a little over 3 years in the war in an Illinois regiment and came to California in 1866. I soon went into New Mexico, Arizona, and all that southern country, where I have spent nearly 6 years. When Tombstone was discovered, I was in Prescott. The first stage that went out of Prescott towards Tombstone was robbed. Robberies were frequent and became expensive, and the disordered condition of the new country soon brought a demand for the better protection of business and money, as well as life. I was asked to go to Tombstone in my capacity as United States Marshal, and went. My brother Wyatt and myself were fairly well treated for a time, but when the desperate characters who were congregated there, and who had been unaccustomed to troublesome molestation by the authorities, learned that we meant business, and were determined to stop their rascality if possible, they began to make it warm for us. The Tombstone country is of a peculiar character, the community being unsettled and dangerous. Most of the businessmen there stay simply to make money enough to live somewhere else comfortably, and of course the greatest object with them is to have as much money as possible spent in the town, and to get as much of it as they can, careless of the means of dispensation or the results of rough manners. Aside from the legitimate businessmen, the bulk of the residents are idle or desperate characters, most of them coming into town broke, and depending on the gambling table or criminal ventures to supply them with means of livelihood and dissipation. The cowboys at one time numbered about 200, but during the last 2 years, about 50 of them have been killed. The most of them are what we call saddlers, living almost wholly in the saddle, and largely engaged in raiding into Sonora and adjacent country and stealing cattle, which they sell in Tombstone. It is rarely that any of these stolen cattle are recovered when the thieves are closely pursued, and it seems likely that they will be overhauled and the stock recovered. The cowboys sell the cattle to some of the butchers, practically in partnership with them, and I know of cases where the finest cattle in the country have been sold at $1 a head. When cattle are not handy, the cowboys rob stages and engage in similar enterprises to raise money. As soon as they are in funds, they ride into town, drink, gamble, and fight. They spend their money as free as water in the saloons, dance houses, or faro banks. And this is one reason they have so many friends in town. All that large class of degraded characters who gather the crumbs of such carosses stand ready to assist them out of any trouble or into any paying rascality. The saloons and gambling houses, into whose treasuries most of the money is ultimately turned, receive them cordially and must be called warm friends of the cowboys. A good many of the merchants fear to express themselves against the criminal element because they want to keep the patronage of the cowboys friends. And the result is that when any conflict between officers and cattle thieves or stage robbers occurs, followed up by shootings around town, as witnessed during the last few months, most of the expression of opinion comes from the desperado class and their friends, and the men who should speak loudest and most decisively to correct the conditions of affairs are generally the quietest. An officer doing his duty must rely almost entirely upon his own conscience for encouragement. The sympathy of the respectable portion of the community may be with him, but it is not openly expressed. The bad element knows its advantage in this respect and makes the most of it. The cowboys are collected from all parts of the western country, from which they have been crowded by advancing civilization, and they know that Arizona is about the only place left for them to operate in. With a complete breaking up of their company threatened in event of losing their hold where they are now, they resist official interference with the greatest desperation. Concerning the fights between the cowboys and myself and brothers, it has been stated over and over again that there was an old feud between us and some of our enemies, and that we were fighting only to revenge personal wrongs and gratify personal hatred. All such statements are false. We went into Tombstone to do our duty as officers. To do that, we were put in conflict with a band of desperados, and it resolved itself into a question of which side could first drive the other out of the country, or kill them in it. Today, my brother Morg is dead, and I am a cripple for life. My other brothers are fugitives, but they will give themselves up. It was our boys who killed Stilwell. Before Stilwell died, he confessed that he killed Morg, and gave the names of those who were implicated with him. When my brothers were leaving Arizona, they got dispatches from Tucson saying that Stilwell and a party of friends were watching all the railroad trains passing that way, and were going through them in search of all Earps and their friends, carrying short shotguns under their overcoats and promising to kill on sight. Our boys were bound to look out for themselves, and when they got near Tucson, were very cautious. They found Steelwell near the track and killed him. For the first time, the sheriff has shown anxiety to arrest someone, and the boys are keeping out of his way. The court in Tombstone does not sit again for 6 months yet, and they don't want to lie in jail all that time waiting for trial. But when the court sits again, they will give themselves up, and, with fair play, will be acquitted. The press dispatches that have been sent here have been very unfair to us, and have been made to conform to a plan to carry all these fights into politics this season. I am a Republican. My brothers are Democrats. I am sorry to see the thing taken into politics as a personal measure, because a true aspect of the trouble will be lost and new enmities are likely to be created. I heard that Doc Holliday, one of our friends about whom there has been considerable talk, had been captured at Denver. Word was sent me that he would be taken out on a writ of habeas corpus, and that before an officer from the territory could reach him, he would be released. I do not know if he succeeded in getting off or not. There was something very peculiar about Doc. He was gentlemanly, a good dentist, a friendly man, and yet outside of us boys, I don't think he had a friend in the territory. Tales were told that he had murdered men in different parts of the country, that he had robbed and stolen and committed all manner of crimes. And yet, when persons were asked how they knew it, they could only admit that it was heresy, and that nothing of the kind had in reality traced up to Doc's account. He was a slender, sickly fellow, but whenever a stage was robbed or a row started and help was needed, Doc was one of the first to saddle his horse and report for duty. The stories, at one time widely circulated, that we were in with the cowboys and quarreled over the division of the spoils, was ridiculous. It was at least disbelieved by Wells Fargo and Company, who I represented, and while I was a city marshal, they gave me this.
The speaker here displayed, on the inside of his coat, a large gold badge, a 5-pointed star, set inside of a circular band, inscribed on one side, City Marshal, Tombstone, Arizona Territory, and on the other, V.W. Earp, with compliments of Wells Fargo and Company. Mr. Earp was in such pain that for the time, his story was cut short. He was met at Oakland by 2 friends who accompanied him to the city, where he will remain about 30 days. Yesterday, he placed himself under the care of a leading surgeon and was unable to receive visitors, keeping himself well secluded. His escape from death by his last wounds were remarkable. Besides the shot which crippled his arm, he was shot clean through the body, and upon the day following that upon which the dead body of his brother reached the home of his parents, he too arrived at Colton, expecting to die. Though in good health otherwise, his arm will prevent any further participation in the sensational warfare against the cowboys. One note I have to add about this interview: I find it odd that Virgil says that he is a Republican, but that his brothers were Democrats. Wyatt Earp has always been connected to the Republican Party, so I wonder if this was a way for Virgil to try and leave politics out of their situation. If the Earp brothers were both Republicans and Democrats, then perhaps people on both sides of the aisle could be more sympathetic to their case. But that's merely my own personal conjecture. After the Vendetta ride was over, Virgil Earp still led an eventful life. He was elected as the first city marshal of Colton, California, was a boxing matchmaker and gambling hall operator, became involved in mining in Arizona, and would later be reunited with his first wife and daughter. In 1904, Virgil arrived in Goldfield, Nevada, a newly created gold mining town. Afterwards, he was hired as a deputy sheriff for Esmeralda County, Nevada. Virgil would pass away on October 19, 1905, from pneumonia. He was 62 years old, and at the request of his daughter, he was buried at the Riverview Cemetery in Portland, Oregon.